You're listening to the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse at bellydancegeek.com.
Hi, everybody. I'm Nadira Jamal, and welcome to the Belly Dance Geek Clubhouse. The Clubhouse is a place where dancers can get together and get geeky on all of those things that are hard to get in classes and on DVDs. It's really easy to get help with the what, so things like moves and choreography, but it's a lot harder to get help with the why and the how, so musicality, culture, business, professionalism. All of those things can be harder to find. So every month I interview a different guest expert on a different topic, and we always have time for question and answer so you can geek out too. So if you think that knowledge and creativity go together like chocolate and peanut butter, you are in the right place. My guest today is Treasure Marshall. Treasure is a professional performer and live event producer from Corpus Christi, Texas. Formerly the costume mistress for Ballet Nacional, she designs and constructs all of her own costumes. She's also the creator of the DVD Treasure's Skirtwork for Fusion Belly Dance. You can learn more about Treasure at treasuremarshall.wordpress.com. Today, Treasure's going to talk about how to use costuming to enhance your performance. A lot of us choose our costumes based on what makes us look good, and that does matter, but it's not the only role that it plays in your show. So we're going to talk about some other aspects today. Thanks so much for coming, Treasure.
Thanks for inviting me.
So tell us a little bit about how you got started in belly dance.
Well, when I was a little girl, it was the 70s. It was quite popular, and my mother had some belly dance books. And so I would lay on the floor and look at the pictures and just think how elegant and I just thought the women in the pictures were just so fabulous, and I wanted to do that. And I wanted to do it for a really long time. And my family tried to find classes for me, but there really wasn't anything available for children. And then when I was 9, we moved back to Texas, and it turned out that a business associate of my grandfather's he was a Lebanese gentleman, and his wife taught belly dance at the rec center. So she took me on a trial basis. She'd never had children, and it was understood that if I made any trouble or I didn't do well, that I wasn't going to be allowed to stay. And so I was very, very careful because I'd wanted to do it for so long, and I danced with her until I was a senior in high school. So it worked out well.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get into costuming?
Well, when I was in high school, I was in the choir, and once a year we would put on a musical and sometimes other different things that we had to do costuming for. And the director always pointed me out and said that, I was really good at it, and she always wanted to pull me to the front because I had, good costuming skills. And so that's kind of where it started, and it's just been something that because I always did either music like choir or because I danced, I just needed costuming, so I kind of had to rely on my own skills.
Now, what are the things that we need to take into account when we choose a costume for a particular show?
Well, I think the number one thing that you need to think about is your audience. What you might pick for, say, a family event is going to be a lot different than what you're going to pick for other belly dancers, or even something that's for the general public. So when you're thinking about costuming, I think the very, very first thing you have to consider is your audience.
Now, what about costuming for a particular occasion? How do you choose costuming to suit different types of events or different types of audiences?
I would say ask a lot of questions. Talk to your host. Find out what kind of an event it is. Again, ask about the audience. Is it going to be families? Is it going to be, just what kind of people are going to be there? Another thing that's really, really important is, do they have some sort of theme, which is very frequently the case. And then you're going to want to try to fit yourself into that theme, either in flavor, like commonly we have in my area, people do like fiesta-type parties. So maybe you want to do something that looks a little Latin. Or perhaps I danced recently at a casino type, so I try to follow that with my costuming. So once you talk to the host and kind of sound them out, it's a little bit easier to choose.
Now, how do you go about gauging what level of modesty you need for a particular show?
Again, I would go back to talking to your host. In my region is I tend to dance for conservative audiences, and a lot of my judging and gauging has just come from experience. You know, if you go out and you're showing a lot of skin, you can feel, you know, if the audience doesn't like that, you can feel it. They're going to relay that to you. So then you go, oh, you know, that didn't play so well. So maybe next time I'm going to cover up a little more, or maybe I'm going to do something that's a little more folkloric looking. And some of it just comes from experience. And again, the host will often say, you know, really, they're going to kind of tell you what they want. They're going to tell you, I'll give you a really good idea of what's going to be acceptable and what isn't.
Now, you know, one thing that I know is important is giving the audience what they expect to see from a belly dancer. And for a lot of audiences, that does mean a two-piece costume with a bare belly. Do you have any suggestions for finding the middle ground between the need to cover up sometimes and the need to present that two-piece look?
Yes, I would say that a body stocking is a great, you know, that's kind of an in-between thing, particularly if it's colored. Because then it looks more modest. It's not quite so transparent. And even from a distance, you know, flesh-toned body stockings, they're meant to look like flesh. So if you bring in, say, which is one level of modesty, and then you can add some color to it. It looks more opaque. It looks more like a dress. It still gives that kind of look. And there's going to be some people that don't think this is a good idea, but, you know, go to the Orientalist paintings and kind of look at those. They're more covered, and yet in a second you can see it's a belly dancer.
I just have a little side note to add to that. So a lot of you may know that in Egypt, dancers are required by law to cover their bellies. And a lot of them get that two-piece look with a body stocking, and they wear these huge, ugly zippers up the back so that when the inspectors come in, they can see from the back of the room that they do have a cover-up.
Right.
So, but I don't think I recommend those because they're ugly.
Mm-hmm.
But, all right, so let's talk about costuming for different spaces. What recommendations do you have for costuming when you're dancing on a bigger or a smaller stage?
Well, when you're dancing on a smaller stage or you're very close to your audience, think about details and quality of materials. So that's the place where you want to see, the tiny little seed beads and the little tiny stones and the silk and all those really luxurious fabrics. That is where it plays the best, because when you put those things on a big stage, of course, you know, it's nice to have good quality costumes, but a lot of the importance of that and the impact of that is going to kind of go away. So your high-quality costumes that have lots of little tiny details, that's the place to wear in settings where you're going to be very close to your audience. When you go to a big stage, everything has to get bigger and higher. So your hair gets higher, your headpiece is bigger, it's more elaborate. It's really amazing what disappears under the lights on a big stage. Everything from safety pins to eyebrows just go away and you can't see them. So if you're going to be on a big stage, you need to either make or choose a costume that has larger, less detailed patterns, and like, for instance, with the sequins, think of something more like a starburst instead of very elaborate curly cues, which isn't going to play as well. I mean, certainly you might be able to see it from the front row, but from the back row or the balcony, you're really not going to see that. So more crude shapes, more and also the quality of the materials becomes much, much less important on a large stage. So you can get by with that really cheap double knit that you got on sale that's maybe a really great color but feels awful. That plays very, very well on a large stage. Be sure and pick like larger size stones, larger size trim, because all that stuff just seems to disappear.
Mm-hmm. Now, when we talk about larger stages, we're mostly talking about distance from the audience. Are there any other things that need to be taken into consideration, like lighting or?
Yes, definitely. If you know what your lighting situation is going to be, that is definitely going to help you. And in fact, Princess Berhana has done some articles about how light affects the color of your costume, which would be a great, if you really are going to know about that, then I highly suggest you look at her blog. She's got some recommendations about that. I think she may also have that in her new handbook. I think I remember that it's in the handbook as well. Frequently, though, we don't have that luxury. We don't know when we get there that, the lights are going to be yellow or whatever. That's often something we don't have any control over. So there's not much that you can do about that except choose vibrant colors. That doesn't completely erase any problem, but, it's not going to disappear as readily.
Now, when you're closer or farther to the audience, does that affect how much skin you should be showing?
I think that the idea of showing skin is definitely a personal decision. Again, back to your audience, it's definitely, and also the image that you, as a dancer, have honed. Everybody builds an image, and if your image is, really there, really sexy, and that's working for you, then, certainly, as up to a point, then if your host is okay with that, then go with it. I think that if you're going to choose a body stocking, though, that does have an effect because I have seen body stockings on stage that did not match the skin tone well, and it really looked awkward. It was very unusual looking. So I would say be very careful if you're going to use something other than just bare skin to match it closely to your skin color or to have it match your costuming.
Now, what about backdrops? I know especially when you're in a theatrical situation, you may get a very solid color or some kind of painted backdrop. Does that affect your costuming choices? If you know?
If you know, yeah. If you know, then of course, I would say, yeah, of course, if you are going to know ahead of time, then, yeah, you need to think about your background. But I would say it's safe to say that lots of venues use black, so you don't want black on black. That's not going to show up real well. Another thing that they use is kind of it's not really white, it's kind of a cream, or what I would call like the color of muslin. Unbleached muslin color is also common, which works much better because colors are going to pop more against that kind of a background. Another thing I've seen is gray and a really, really dark kind of classic red velvet theater color. All of those, I would, even the red up to a point because it's so dark, those are kind of what I would call neutrals. So you don't want black on black, you don't want gray on gray or whatever, but I would say if you go with something that has a lot of color saturation, not necessarily a bright, but even like a dark blue, but think really rich coloring, that's going to work on most backdrops.
Now, I know that when we talk about a black backdrop, not wearing black on black, even things like navy or a dark teal don't necessarily pop against those. Do you have a sense of how light somebody would need to go, or do you just eyeball it and do your best guess?
Well, I'm somebody who just really, really loves color, so I would say that unless your theme, like unless you're trying to portray something that has kind of dark imagery, I just wouldn't go there. I would just stay away from the dark colors. Now, if you are going to be doing something that's really dark, man, that's really hard because I would go with any dark other than black. Like if you really need the dark color for the imagery that you're trying to portray, then I would go with, let's pick a really dark grape or something that is, yeah, it's a dark color, but it still has that color saturation, that kind of, think about Halloween costumes. A lot of them are dark, but at the same time they have color. It's red, or it's, but not red in a happy sense. It's this very dark blood look red. So so I would say if you're going to, if it's really necessary to go with a dark color at all, then pick a dark color that has heavy color saturation.
Mm-hmm. Now, do you have any tips on footwear for different flooring?
Yes, I do. Now, I have not found anything that's perfect for every situation. But if you're going to be doing something like where you're outside, you're dancing on asphalt or concrete or something like that, you probably want something that has a little bit of thickness to the sole, some padding, because otherwise you're going to be stepping on every tiny little rock, and you're going to be paying way more attention to how uncomfortable you are than your dance. So I would pick a sandal. I went looking, and I was hoping to find it. I don't think they're available anymore, but I have a pair of Reef Sandals, which is a high-end beachwear brand that I have found work really, really well. But they aren't flip-flops. They have something around the back of the ankle to keep it secure. And I don't think they make those anymore. But to say something that has a little bit of thickness, it's very important that the sole be flexible, because you want to be able to roll up on the ball of your foot and all those things, and also be sure that it's really, really secure. But so something like that, something where you're dancing on a bad surface, you're going to want some kind of sandal, I think, is probably your best choice. Two qualities would be sure it's very secure on your foot, and be sure that it's very flexible. If you're going to be dancing on something like one of those portable stages that are kind of, I don't know, when I dance on those I feel kind of like I'm rocking back and forth, and maybe there's seams where they are hooked together, a sandal will get hooked on those seams. So for that kind of a situation, something that is smooth and enclosed, like a ballet slipper, a Grecian sandal, something like that. Again, even a ghillie. Ghillies are kind of a good choice for that kind of an event or kind of situation. Is going to probably be a better bet, because I have had, the edge of my shoe, the sole of my shoe get caught on those seams. So.
And I don't know if everybody knows this. This was a revelation to me, but ballet slippers come in gold and silver.
Yeah.
Not in wide widths, which makes me very cranky, at least not that I found. And if anybody knows where they are, tell me.
You may have to special order, but you can get it.
Nice. All right. So you've touched on costuming for a theme. Do you have any tips on using costuming to enhance the mood or the theme of your piece?
Mood or theme? Well, I guess... let me think. Well, I would say, again, if you're color is super, super critical. So if you're portraying something dark, then as we've talked about, we want to pick those kind of rich colors. Theme. Let me think about that. Well, let's say you're dancing for Cinco de Mayo. Well, maybe you really want to go all out, go over the top. Let's do, white and red and green like a Mexican flag. Let's really. What we think of as being cheesy tends to often goes over really big with an audience. They like that. They really do. Corny and hammy and cheesy. They love that. So maybe you want to think about color in that kind of a way. Maybe you're doing a poker theme and you want, look like a deck of cards. So we're going with more of the red and black. I think that's probably my best advice.
Now, what if you're going for like a more romantic feeling for your piece versus like fiery and spicy and sharp? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, I would say, of course, depending on your coloring, but that's what I think of as being innocent, all that soft, romantic-y stuff. In my mind and to my eye, that's like pastels. And again, you can pick a pastel. You can go with a pink or something like that, but pick something that has some intensity to it. Say, for instance, this isn't the greatest example ever, but say a carnation as opposed to a shell pink, which is going to be much paler, much, depending on lighting, you can look washed out really fast. So we're right back to that whole color saturation idea.
I know for me, it often comes down to chiffon versus lycra.
Yeah,
so if I've got this
true.
like lovely romantic thing, I'll go for this like flowing chiffon everything, and if I'm going for something like bing bang boom, I'll go for like a sleeker lycra look too.
That's a good point. That's a good point. You do also want to consider texture. That's an excellent point. So think about like how the floaty quality of chiffon, a lycra, as you say, slicker, but then also think about other textures like something much more coarse like gauze. You know, that's going to make you look more folkloric, or even something as simple as broadcloth. You know, the physical texture of the fabric really does make an impact on how the finished garment looks.
I think a lot of us who are used to buying commercial costumes really only get exposed to velvet, chiffon, and lycra. Are there other fabrics that you think we should be looking into besides the ones you've mentioned, or are those the big ones?
Well, of course, those are the main players. But I know I see a lot of silk, which is beautiful under the right circumstances. So silk is a great one. It has both the smooth, slick, sleek look and also that kind of floaty quality that you're talking about. It kind of will pick up the air just a little bit and move, you know, like a veil. I mean, think about how beautifully flowy a veil looks. So there's silk, and there's I really tend to pick up whatever I see that just draws me. I'm very much a texture person, and so I'll color and texture are very attractive to me. So I may walk down a fabric aisle and see something that just, because of the color or the way, it just makes me want to go over there and pick it up, and it looks like a juicy piece of fruit or whatever. And so that all plays into it. And don't for myself, I always try to pick fabrics that are washable or at least dry cleanable. But if that's not, because I sweat a lot, I want to be able to throw it in the washing machine. But if that's not an issue for you, then be really open about, you know, what you are willing to use.
Now, if you are making something or buying fabric for somebody else to make, also keep in mind that you can do a washing test first.
Very good point. Very good point. And a lot of other tests, too. I mean, if you, for instance, I do a lot of things that have ruffles on them, and stuff that has a certain amount of polyester or synthetics in it, you can burn the hem rather than hemming it. So in a sense, it's much faster, and it creates a different kind of the way the fabric falls is different. And so you can do also what's called a burn test, where you take tiny, and be very, very careful. You don't want to set the house on fire, but you can, you know, take a little scrap, and you want to use a white candle, because anything other than white is going to smoke, and it's going to burn your fabrics. And then you quickly pass the edge, the cut edge, across the flame. Again, be very careful, be very aware of what you're doing. And if it melts the edge, you're in great shape. You can do that instead of hemming, which can, especially if we used to have what we call burn parties, and we just get tons, because we were, miles and miles and miles of ruffle, and so everybody has their little white candle, and you're just, methodically running this hem down the candle and burning it, so that, so if you got lots of people working on it, it's much faster than traditional hemming.
And you need one person standing by with the fire extinguisher.
Yeah, that's true, yes.
So now, I know for a lot of pieces, when we perform, we are portraying ourselves, or maybe the best piece of ourselves. I'm performer Nadira, not just Jessica. But sometimes we do represent a specific character. When we're doing that, do you have any suggestions for how to use costuming to bring that across?
Yeah, to me, when you're working on a character, the best idea that really the best use of your costuming is to think about exaggerating the qualities of that persona that you're trying to portray. So think about caricature drawings. The head is really large, the ears are oversized, the nose is oversized. That's kind of what you're going for in your costuming. So don't leave anything for the audience to guess about. If you are portraying something that's, for instance, something dark, and you can stick some horns on there, and that's going to work, wear horns. Hey, don't make your audience guess what you're trying to say. Make it really, really plain. Again, they really like that. If you're trying to, if you want to be the the innocent romantic that we were talking about, really, go with pastels and lace and make it look like a princess dress. I mean, really, that exaggerated qualities are going to tell your audience. It's going to speak very clearly and very plainly to your audience.
I think that's really important. You touched earlier on like this idea of cheesy, and when you were saying that, I was thinking of, when we dance, we know what we have in mind, but the audience doesn't. So what seems like too much to us is just what it takes for them to get the idea.
I think that is really, really very, very true. A lot, especially if you're dealing with a non-dance kind of an audience. I mean, when you're dancing for other dancers, they're a little more imaginative. But when you're dealing with people that don't know anything about dance, and maybe they haven't really been exposed to it very much, they don't speak that language. They don't get it. So speak very plainly with your costuming. Hey, I'm the bad guy. So the whole really, the turned up color and, maybe a cape or, really, really just, because then they get it. They get it, and they don't get it 5 minutes into your piece. They get it right away. So it's much easier to communicate.
Yeah, that makes me think of actually a really cheesy example. But back in like the 90s, there was Lord of the Dance, which is like this big theatrical show based on Irish dance. Sure. And as a brunette, I was always really cranky that the brunette was always the bad girl. It was a brunette in a red dress was the bad girl, and a blonde in the blue dress was the good girl. And I really took offense at that, but it gets its point across.
It sure, yeah,
really
that's right. That's right. There's stereotypes for, those purposes, yeah.
All right. So let's move on to costuming to suit your dancing specifically. So how can your costuming choices help your dance movements read to the audience?
Well, I think that anything that's going to enhance your movement. For instance, if you know that you're doing something that has lots of hip work, put some fringe, put some, I love tassels. Tassels are great at communicating movement, and they're cost-effective. They don't cost as much as that very expensive beaded fringe, and they're just a really good communicator of movement. So think about fringe, think about tassels, and be sure and put and anything else you find. I mean, if you find some strange trim at the fabric store and you kind of swing it and it moves great, use it, And so anything that's going to communicate movement, and be sure and put it specifically in the area of your costume that In other words, if you're going to be doing a lot of chest moves, that's where you need that extra movement. And if you're doing a lot of hip moves, then get out that fringe monster.
Now, I've noticed in my own costumes that the length and the weight of the fringe or other moving elements makes a big difference in what reads. Do you have any tips around that?
Well, I guess go back to the how far away are you from your audience. And so, of course, bigger, further is going to be the key there. The further away, the bigger you want so the longer fringe, the bigger, gaudier tassels, etc. I would say that, let's see. So we want to take into account the distance from the audience. And the other thing is that if you have done a lot of costuming or you're really good about keeping your costumes updated, you will find that certain, the weight, the length, all those things, when you put that costume on and you dance in it, it makes you move differently. So be sure that whatever you choose is not going to hinder the movement that you're trying to give. Like if you know that you're going to be doing floor work, then you don't want to pick the hip band that has the beads that you're afraid are going to break off and scatter to the four winds. So so I would say be sure the two things would be longer would be very important if you're farther from the audience, and be sure that whatever it is that you choose, it's not going to hinder your dance.
I've had some costumes that had extremely short fringe, like 2.5 or 3 inches, and I noticed that you can't see any of my shimmies with them, and it drives me up the wall. So, I kind of have some criteria for myself when I'm costume shopping. If the fringe isn't at least 4 inches, it's not going to work for me. If it's looped fringe and it's too tight, I know it's not going to move. But it does seem like an awful lot of that comes back to what you said, which is, it's going to change your dancing. And so it seems like a really big part of the costuming process, even after it's finished, is just practice the crap out of it.
Oh yeah, and I always say do a dry run. Don't go out for the first time in that costume at that important performance. Be sure you try, and even in stages, if you're constructing your costume and you have, maybe just a skirt made, well, put the skirt on. Do some of the movements you're going to be doing. Be sure it's not going to bind or, I can't take large steps because it's a straight skirt or whatever it is. So be sure that you not only test it, but if you have the option, test it at different stages in the construction.
That's smart. Okay. Now, do you have any suggestions about how costuming affects your body line and how that's visible on stage? So, for example, I've noticed that if I wear those really long gauntlet gloves with the points, my arm work looks very different than if I have, those big drapey bell sleeves or just bracelets.
Right, that's a really good point. You can use silhouettes to help you in different various ways. Like you say, if you're doing a lot of arm movements, then maybe you want something that's either very drapey or maybe it's got fringe hanging down the seam or something like that, and that will accent your movement. Bracelets also accent arms. That's a very good point. A line, it can affect your body line. And think about, for better or worse, think about a silhouette, a black outline. And so if you want to accent, I have a really curvy waist, and I like that about myself, so I really want to show that, then maybe you want to wear a dress because when the light hits you, you're going to be able to see that curve. That curve in your waistline, or maybe I think I really like my legs. I really like the way that looks. So then you want to pick a silhouette that's going to accent that. Maybe you want to pick like a high-low hemline, or maybe you want to pick something that's got a split. So I would say the best thing to think about in those terms would be to actually kind of translate it in your head and think about, okay, what kind of if this were just a silhouette, and all you could see was just a silhouette, what would it look like?
Now, you mentioned that high-low hemline before. You mean something that's knee-length in the front and long in the back? Is that right?
Right.
Oh, okay, gotcha. Now, you mentioned dancing in dresses, and I've become a fan of dresses very recently, but I've noticed that some of them don't have a lot of definition of the hip line. So, when I'm looking for a costume, I like to see something that creates a clear line at the hips, either with a belt over it or with some kind of motif. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them are just like a solid color with some beadwork here and there. Do you think that those are better choices for certain kinds of dancing or certain techniques?
Honestly, that's really more about, and I'm going to get into that later, that makes it very versatile because you can put on a certain kind of belt, and it creates maybe you're wearing what I consider to be a traditional belly dance belt. Maybe it's shaped. So that on a simple silhouette that doesn't have a seam line, say, there, or doesn't have ornamentation there, that's going to look one way. But then if you take that off and you put just a simple hip scarf on it, that's going to look very different. Or a chain belt, or, it's so to my eye, that makes it a versatile garment.
But without something there, you can't necessarily see all these tiny little hip movements that you're doing.
Right, yeah. So generally speaking, I advise people that, some kind of a hip, whether it's a belt, a scarf, or a chain belt, or, even just you see in the old Egyptian movies, and they literally just have this straight strip of fabric that they've tied around their hips. And it works because you can see it. You can see it. So any of that will work, but again, this is personal preference, but I like the way it looks when there is, as you say, a clear definition of the hips, because that's kind of what our dance is about. It's about the hips.
Okay. Now, you are an expert on dancing with a skirt as a prop. As we mentioned before, Treasure's made an entire DVD of skirt work recently. So I'm going to ask you to give us some advice on how to choose skirts for that styling. But before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that if you're not watching us on the webcast, you might want to log in because we have some pictures to show you. You don't need to see them. We're going to describe them to you. But if you like to have some extra visuals, you might want to do that. If you don't have the webcast address handy, I did email that out to the group just before we started with a reminder. And you can also go to the following address. It's Instant Teleseminar, InstantTeleseminar.com/event ID equals 581-02851. And I know that's really long. I'm sorry. If you would like to come and join us, please do. And if not, we'll keep describing everything.
Okay.
So when you are dancing with your skirt as a prop, what advice do you have for how to choose that skirt?
Okay, you want to be sure that it is full enough that whatever kind of movement that you're doing, you're not fighting your skirt. Because you will find that when you start working with a skirt that maybe I'm doing this move, but it's somehow much harder than it should be. It's probably because you're wearing the wrong shape. Now, different shapes are good for different things, but if you find yourself struggling, that's a big clue that you need to change skirts.
So can you tell us about some of the different skirt types?
Sure. Okay, so this is a mermaid skirt. This is a very classic kind of design. Now, this skirt is not suitable for skirt work. However, I include it here for one thing to show you that this is an example of what not to do. Don't use this for skirt work. However, this is a very classic shape. And when we're talking about silhouettes, this is something that is not going to go out of style. So if you pick this silhouette in a yummy color that's not trendy, and maybe it's made out of a very lush fabric, but it doesn't have a lot of ornamentation on it, this is an incredibly versatile style. You know, you can put all kinds of different belts with this. You can put all kinds of different tops with this, and it's not going to go out of style anytime soon. So even though this isn't a good choice for skirt work, this is a really good classic silhouette.
And can you describe the mermaid skirt for the folks who can't see?
Okay, so the mermaid skirt is tight through the hips and thighs. So we've got this whole, it's smooth and sleek from the hip line all the way down to almost knee level, and then it flares out. So this is something that in my mind's eye I see, you know, this sultry siren singer wearing. So again, really classic style.
And I want to add to that I think this is especially pretty with a spin, because it does flare out, but at the same time it flares from the knee instead of from the hip, so it creates this pretty bell shape.
Yeah, very true, very true. Okay, now this is what I call an inverted trumpet shape. Now this is something that is not tight in the hips. It is more fitted than, say, a circle skirt, but it isn't so tight in the hips that you can't pick it up. So this shape is really good for Spanish-style skirt work. It is full enough that you're able to pick it up comfortably without it getting in a bind on the side. And it's also for those of you that do skirt tucks, you can bustle this style. This skirt style will work as a bustle. So it's a really good style for skirt work, but only if you're only doing the Spanish-style skirt work.
And can you describe the trumpet skirt for us?
So the trumpet skirt is very similar to the mermaid. The difference would be that it is much looser in the hips. You have much more ease in the hip, and then so it's more fitted from the hip to the knee, and then it flares out at the bottom just like the mermaid skirt, but you've got a lot more ease there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is an A-line. Now, again, A-lines are classic. They're never going to go out of style. This is another good example of something that won't work for skirt work. If you try to pick this skirt up and do skirt work with it, you're going to get this funny, bunchy binding thing that goes on your side. And again, you're going to be struggling. Not good at all for skirt work. It is, however, flattering on lots of different figures. It's classic. It's not going to go out of style. And it is excellent for showing off fabric that has surface texture. So if you have this really, it doesn't take quite as much yardage. I mean, it does, it's not a straight column, so it's going to take some yardage. But maybe you've got that really gorgeous, lush embroidered fabric and you don't have very much of it. Well, this is going to be a great shape because it's going to really show off the beauty of the surface texture of the fabric. And it's going to be less expensive to make because it doesn't require as much yardage. And actually, this is a much better choice, even if money were no issue and you had miles of some gorgeous fabric, this would still be probably a better choice than, say, a circle skirt because a circle skirt's going to hang in folds. So it creates pleats and folds when you're not holding it. And all that beautiful surface detail is lost. So even though this one won't work for skirt work, it's something that you might want to have in your closet.
Okay. Can you describe the A-line?
A-line literally looks like an A from your hip down to the floor line. It's shaped like a letter A. And again, really classic, works on lots of figures.
It always makes me think of a lampshade, but not in a bad way.
Okay, so this one is a single circle skirt. This is a really, really good shape, again, for any kind of skirt work that you're doing with Spanish style. This is much fuller than the inverted trumpet. So it gives you a little more ease to do bigger movements, but you're not going to be able to do really, really large movements with this without having that whole fighting with your skirt issue going on. So this is, if you're going to do skirt work and you're doing Spanish style, this is a great, great shape. It's not going to work for larger movements, but again, don't discount it because it's very flattering on lots of figures. It's classic. You can just really do a whole lot with it. So good for certain types of skirt work, but even if you don't, you still something you probably want in your costuming closet.
Now, this one's called a circle because it's literally a circle when it lays flat on the floor. Is that right?
Right. This one is a single circle. Now, so when you lay this one down, it looks like a donut. The outside would be your hem, the outside of the donut, and where the donut hole would be, that's your waist area. So when you lay this one flat, it makes one circle, as opposed to a double or a 1.5 circles. So this particular one, I'm glad you pointed out, this is a single circle skirt.
Now, I've noticed that when you go to buy pre-made skirts, this is the most common shape that you find unless you start getting into more expensive skirts. Right, agreed. And probably because, again, this is something they can sell to a lot of different figure shapes. It's flattering on lots of people, so it's a great thing to have in your pocket. And I find that even if it doesn't allow you to do really extensive skirt work, it does have a great look when you spin.
True, and this one will bustle. Again, like we talked about before, this one you can do a bustle. There's other skirt tucks you can do with it. It's not quite big enough to do some of the tribal styles, but still large enough to get that effect.
And my teacher used to point out that if you have at least a full circle with a firm enough hem, sometimes the skirt will actually shake back and forth when you shimmy. You kind of have to practice it to get it, but all those little tucks and folds start to make this rippling
Really
wave.
good idea. Really good idea. Yeah, think about when you say that, think about a skirt with a piece of trim around the bottom. That would give it enough weight to give it that movement.
But you definitely have to try it out because it'll depend on the fabric and on the hem and on how you shimmy.
Right. What else will work to create that effect is bands of sequins. That's something we do in footwear. They'll use strips of sequins and they stack them. So you'll have a band at the bottom of the garment that's maybe 5 or 6 inches deep. Usually it's multiple colors. That's why they do them in bands. And then you spin and it wraps around you and then recovers. Very, very twirly skirt thing going on. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay, so this is the kind of the ideal if you're going to be doing skirt work. 1.5 to 2 circles. And to my eye, this is really the thing that is going to be the most versatile. It's going to give you the lesser of the headaches. So this is, we're back to the donut shape. But when you lay this donut on the floor, it actually has more than one circle in it. It will have 1.5 circles or up to 2 full circles. So this one, you're able to extend your arm. Like if you grab your skirt, pick up your skirt, and you extend your arm straight out, this is full enough that you're going to be able to extend your arm without like at hip level or higher, all the way out with a straight arm without having any kind of problems. You're not going to be fighting your skirt.
So it doesn't bind, it doesn't start lifting up at the bottom.
Right. So this is, to me, this is the ideal for skirt work because it's a circle rather than the tribal, which is gathered strips. Tribal usually consists of strips of fabric that have been sewn together and gathered. So there's a more bulkiness at the waist with a tribal skirt, whereas this is like nice and, not a lot of bulk. And more, not only does it visually look less bulky, but, when you're layering stuff, the less bulk you have, the better off your overall end result.
I do skirt work for American Cabaret style 9/8 versus the Trumpet style ones, and I wear double circles. So it's 2 half circles for the front panel and 2 half circles for the back. And so most of my circular leaning wardrobe is just these double circles. And I find that even for things like spins, it's just gorgeous.
Oh, yeah.
Listen to hem.
Yes. Right. Yeah, agreed. Totally agreed. And more than anything else is you can do it and not struggle. And that's going to make such a difference in your dance. If you're fighting your costume, you're not thinking about your dance. And the audience sees that. So if my best advice on any costuming, with skirt work or otherwise, is if you feel uncomfortable in it, like you feel like you're going to step on it, you feel like it's falling, anything that makes you feel not secure, if you can change it, do it, because otherwise you're going to be thinking about your costume, and that's not what you want when you're on stage.
And if I can add a side note to that, I would also add that when you are learning how to do these techniques, these skirt work techniques for style, get yourself a really good skirt to start with. I see a lot of people, kind of trying to save money by bringing in whatever skirt they already have.
Right.
And if it's not a great choice for skirt work, you can't really get a handle on the technique.
Agreed. Totally agreed. So, yes, if you are really, really, truly interested in skirt work, and this is not just, I'd just like to try it out, and I'm not really serious, and I may not ever do it again, in that case, you might not want to spend the money. But if it's something that you just have admired and you love it and you want to learn it, then, yes, invest in a good practice skirt.
But, again, we're coming back to this 1.5 or 2 circles. These are very classic belly dance looks, too. So even if you decide skirt work isn't for you, there's still going to be a nice stage look for others.
Absolutely. We're back to classic styles that look good on lots and lots of different figures. So, yeah, always a good thing to have in your costuming wardrobe.
Now, I've noticed, in the AMCAB and especially kind of vintage Turkishy look, the 1.5 circle skirts are usually slit. So you have 2 half panels in the back and a half panel in the front, and these can be slit all the way up to the belt.
Yeah, just like the 70s circle skirts.
Yes.
Those are, yeah. Now, that's not ideal for skirt work. Ideally, you're either going to want the seam to be completely closed. The other thing that I have done successfully, now this is going to depend on your fabric choice, but what I think of as the classic 1970s skirt, it has one panel in the front that's 1 half circle. The back is 2 half circles that have been stitched together, and it's open up to the hip on each leg. Now, I have successfully done some skirt moves by wearing that sort of skirt and then just reaching up and using only the back panel. And as a matter of fact, now that I'm thinking about it, I've seen Sarah Skinner on her instructional DVD. She has used that kind of in order to demonstrate a move. She doesn't have the panel in the front, so you can only, she's only using the back panel so you can see her legs. So we know that if you choose the right kinds of fabrics, you can even do skirt work with with something that doesn't really have a front. But I wouldn't pick something that's slit because you're going to maybe grab it in the wrong place and it opens up when you're trying to use it. That's not going to be ideal.
Now, my teacher did come up in that era, and she taught us with slit skirts. So we did all kinds of practicing of how to grab both sides of the slit.
Oh, wow. What a great thing to have in your repertoire. That's wonderful.
Recommended trim on both sides of the slit, so like a long strip of sequin trim so that you can feel whether you've got
yes, right.
It's not the effect of how the skirt moves, but it's a totally different technique.
Agreed, and it's something that I think you I don't know, you're familiar with it. Do you feel like somebody would have to show you how to do it?
I don't know if showing is necessary. What we did was we used our pointer finger to trace the slit, and we would pinch the back panel between the middle finger and the pointer and the front panel between the thumb and the pointer. And I don't know if it makes any sense over the phone. And then once you have those pieces pinched, you would slide your fingers down.
Right.
And that's why the trim was so helpful, is because you would essentially have that nice firm channel.
Right.
Grab. And to this day, I actually have a harder time with a fully closed skirt because I'm trying to guess where the side seam is.
Yeah. We're back to muscle memory and all that.
You know, when you have zills on, you can actually cheat, and you use the zill. So instead of your pointer, middle, and thumb, you use your middle, pointer, and ring finger. And so you're essentially sliding the zill along your leg and grabbing that. But that was a much trickier technique. I don't use that one as often.
Understood.
All right. Next slide.
Okay. So I like for people to think about maybe putting a ruffle on their skirt. So the reason I say that is because having a lot of experience with a skirt, I find that ruffles really make a lot of difference in how accented the move looks visually to the audience. So you can do the exact same movement with the exact same intensity with a skirt that doesn't have a ruffle, and it's going to look a lot different than if you're using a skirt that does have a ruffle. Now, of course, we don't often see belly dancers that have like just we maybe see ruffles on belly dancers, but they're not like, okay, there's a ruffle on the bottom of her skirt. But really consider that look, because when you do skirt work, it definitely accents the movement, makes it look much more noticeable to the audience, especially from a distance. So there's a couple of different kinds of ruffles. So this one that we're looking at right now, this is a circular ruffle. So we think about that donut shape we talked about, and if you take that donut shape and you slice it up the side, and then you put a gathering thread around what would be the center of the donut, and draw it up, then we have a short edge and a long edge. So we end up with this kind of serpentine effect at the bottom of the ruffle. So that hangs differently, moves differently, and looks differently than a straight ruffle, which we're going to look at in just a minute. Okay, so here's the... There we go. Okay, so this is a flat ruffle or a straight ruffle. Now, this is just a strip of fabric that has been gathered on one edge. This is, something we see in little girls' dresses, So it will accent the movement just as much as the circular ruffle, but it takes a lot less fabric. It's easier to cut. It's easier to sew. So either will work. The circular ruffle is a little more flirty and romantic looking, but requires a whole lot more fabric. So either will work, and it's kind of a matter of personal preference.
I've said I've done a lot of skirt work in the American Cabaret 9/8 thing specifically, and I've noticed a huge difference in how the ruffle itself moves when it's a circular ruffle. It creates this like undulating ripple.
Yes.
Whereas the flat ruffle just kind of poofs in a pretty way.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with either. It's really personal preference. And monetary preference, because the other takes a lot more yardage. But either will accent your movement much more than just a plain circle skirt with no ruffle. Okay, so this one is a hybrid. Now, I know a lot of people, they like that tribal look.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
I'm not sure that everybody who's listening knows what the tribal look is. Can you tell us what that is?
Okay, so this is a very, very full, okay, here we are. This is the tribal, what we think of as a tribal skirt. Now, I'm sure there's more than one way to make this, but commonly the strip that we talked about, the ruffle that I showed you, okay, this is that same idea. It's straight strips of fabric that have been gathered on one edge, and then they're sewed one on top of another, and it creates this really, really, really large skirt. Now, tribal is very popular right now, so probably lots of people already own this shape. And this is great. There's nothing wrong with it, but if you're just starting out and you've never done skirt work before, I really don't recommend that you start with a tribal skirt. This is a lot of yardage. It's, generally speaking, it is double the amount of yardage as the circle skirt we've been talking about, the 1.5 to 2 circle skirt, and that is a whole lot of fabric to learn how to manipulate and control. And you want control in your skirt work. You want that skirt to flip just that way. That's how you planned it. So I don't recommend this. It's something you could maybe graduate to if that's the look you want. And again, like we're back to, well, I just want to try skirt work. I'm not really sure if I want to do it or not. If you already own this shape, then yeah, go ahead and try it out. If you find yourself fighting or struggling, that's a good indicator that you need a different kind of skirt.
So if you're looking at these tiered rows of ruffles or tiers.
Right, yeah, tiered skirt. Yeah, this is a tiered style. Then, maybe, try it out. Doesn't work so great. Well, you tried.
Yeah. And if it is something that you want to try, again, this is something that a lot of people have. You can borrow one from a friend before you invest.
True. Yes, and they're quite expensive, too. So, yes, agreed. Okay, so this would be my recommendation for people who want that kind of tribal look, that tiered skirt. But this is going to be a lot easier to manipulate. Now, this one would be what I call a hybrid. It's a double circle at the top, 1.5 to 2 full circles. I recommend 2 full circles. So at the top of it consists of 2 full circles, and then those straight strips or those tiers, those are added maybe at the knee, from the knee down. This way you get that kind of flavor of the tribal skirt, but it's a little smaller, a little easier to manipulate.
So for those of you who can't listen, what makes this one look different to me is that it's got those tiers of ruffles, but only like from the bottom to the knee.
Right.
And from the rest of the way up, it's a circle skirt. So if you are looking at the picture, just make sure that you understand that these are not ruffles that are sewn onto a single skirt. They're the ruffles making up the lower layers.
This is not attached on top of the skirt. This is literally straight strips that are, butted together and sewn together so that the straight strips are creating the skirt.
And that creates all this amazing fullness at the hem.
Right.
That's why we get that effect.
Right.
Okay. Now, I want to mention one thing that I've seen used a lot. So, you've talked about, you don't always see belly dancers wearing ruffles on their skirts. And I'm not a big fan in terms of the, what looks good on me sense. I wear them when I do want that, really enhanced look to the skirt work.
Right.
But as somebody with short legs and a long torso, I don't necessarily want the visual break there. So it's kind of a battle between my vanity and what effect I'm trying to create. I've noticed, though, that if I want to emphasize the skirt work, sometimes I'll layer a different color skirt under the bottom so that when the skirt is moving, you see that extra little pop of color.
Right. Well, let me ask you, because my first thought would be, when you go to pick up your skirt, are you able to pick up just that top layer, or do you find yourself grabbing both?
I can grab both, and the reason for that is that I actually pin, so I have skirts that are split up to the waist, to the hip, but I pin them at the knee, to the knee. And so at the point where I'm grabbing them, they are pinned together, and I do that through all of the layers.
Right.
So I can literally grab both at once. So I am working with both at once. So I might have a red layer underneath a turquoise layer, and the red doesn't necessarily show until I start flipping the skirt.
Well, think about, try this. It may, be enough of a change that be sure that whatever the body of the skirt is made out of, make the ruffle out of that too. So, yeah, there is a little bit of a visual break, but if it's the same color and fabric, less of a visual break. And then you can add, like if you really want some color, add a trim to the bottom. Then you have, there is a visual break, but maybe because it's all one color all the way down with just the trim, the visual break is at your ankle, which is going to be much less cutting visually than, say, and again, the ruffle can be any depth. In other words, a 2 or 3 inch ruffle is going to accent movement just the way a 6 or an 8 inch ruffle will. So again, visually, if you're worried about a visual break, go with a more narrow ruffle, and so that means that the visual break will be lower on your leg, closer to the ankle than up, maybe in the middle of your, that I think you might be able to achieve that same effect with the ruffle without having as disruptive a visual break.
That's a great idea because, the ruffles, especially when it's a circular ruffle or a bias ruffle, adds more movement to the skirt. It's not just about showing what the hem is doing. It makes the hem do cooler things. So
yes, it does.
There's so much value in adding that if you can swing it.
Totally agree with you.
All right. Is there anything else you want to tell us about skirts for skirt work?
Well, I would say that fabric is really important. The fabric that you choose is going to affect how it moves. So if you want something that is going to be really easy to manipulate, then if you're probably going to want to pick something that's like a cotton polyester blend, something that's shirt weight. Now, you will have to pay attention to if you're doing something like the inverted trumpet that we talked about, you're going to want to pick something that's a little thicker or something with print because since it's not as full, it's going to be more transparent. So be aware of that. But if you're doing a circle skirt or a double circle skirt, there's lots of fullness. You can use a thinner fabric. Something that's cotton polyester blend doesn't wrinkle very easily, and you can grab it really quickly. It's not slippery. That's going to be the easiest thing to work with. It's not the most beautiful, but it is easy to work with, easy to manipulate, easy to get it up in the air. All those things. So that's one. That's one thing to consider. And then things like satin. Now, satin is absolutely gorgeous on stage. Everything from the thinner, less expensive costuming satin right up to the very heavy bridal satins that are way more pricey. Those all on stage, they're really rich. They're really and they move beautifully, but very different. They look different. They move differently. They're heavier. They're harder to get in the air. They're slippery. But if you are practiced or it's important to you and you practice enough, then wow, it's very, very effective. Then if you pick something like a sheer, which you will have to be sure that A, you're wearing a slip or, appropriate undergarments, and B, that you want to be sure that it has a little bit of body. You don't want to pick any kind of fabric for skirt work that's really soft and, the only exception would be lycra, which is kind of a different animal. But stuff like silk, things like those really, back in the 70s, they had these really, really soft, drapey polyester shears that's just, you need something with a little more body than that because otherwise you're going to have a lot of difficulty getting it in the air and getting it to move the way you want to. So I would say if you're going to use a sheer, that can be very lovely and it can create this very nice floaty quality, but it's slippery. So you need some practice. And also you need to be very careful to pick one that has just a little bit of body.
Mm-hmm. Now, on your DVD, you talk a little bit about what to wear on your hips when you're doing skirt work. Do you want to share some tips with us?
Sure. When I see people doing skirt work, and I'm not saying it's wrong, I'm not the belly dance police, I'm not saying it's wrong, but one of the things that I've seen is that you see people wearing a traditional belly dance belt, what I think of kind of classic cabaret-looking belt, or sometimes you'll see these very ethnic-looking Indian belts. And the problem with that and skirt work is when you go to lift the skirt up, you're either going to lift that belt right off your hips, or if you've pinned it and it can't move, then you're not going to get this nice line visually from your hip to your hand. There's a break because the belt is holding it down. So I recommend that rather than using a traditional belly dance belt or even a hip scarf or anything of that nature, that you use a chain belt. And I know that commonly we see chain belts that are sewn to a base, but for our purposes, we don't want to do that. We just want to wear a chain belt, and it accents visually the movement. So you can see the movement just like we talked about with the scarves and all that. But it's going to allow you it self-corrects. So if you lift it up and it rides up and you let go, it's going to fall right back down.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I'm doing like a full-length show, I do wear a traditional belly dance belt, and I just work around it, and that's my limitation. And if my skirt can't go quite so high, that's what I can't do. But I have, when I've practiced, since I saw your video, I have been practicing usually without a belt. I don't have a lot of chain belts, and I do notice a significant difference. So, if you're doing a piece that's mainly about skirt work, then you want to choose your costume to make as much room for your skirt work as possible. Whereas being at a larger show, then that's when you have to compromise.
I'm really excited to hear that you tried it and you had a good experience. That's great. That's great. So, and belts, too, it doesn't, it can be a belly dance belt like those belts that we see, the belts that have bells. That's great. But it didn't have to be. It can be any kind of a chain belt. Like I have a lot of fashion belts, really. Particularly vintage fashion belts are nice and heavy, and maybe they have stones and all this glorious stuff on them. So it doesn't have to be what we think of as a belly dance belt. It can just be a fashion belt. And another thing because I have this figure issue where belts right up in the back and they hang down in the front. So very often I will choose a belt that has only ornamentation in the front, because then when it hangs down, because it's going to hang them down in the front anyway, so then it looks like, she meant to do that. It's supposed to be like that. And another great thing that you can do with chain belts is the little tassels. And I love tassels. I just love the way they look. I love the way they move. And they're very cost effective. So you can buy tassels, and they generally have that loop on the end, and you can just thread that tassel through a loop on the chain and have it on there temporarily, and it shows your movements. And then if you decide for the next costume you really don't want that, well, you just unloop it and take it off, and it's no big deal.
Nice. Okay. Now, I know that you're a really accomplished costumer. So, are there any just other tips that you'd like to share about costuming or sewing?
Yeah, sure. One of the things that I'd like to share is a couple of things. One of them is consider just using a basic dress as a costume base. So think about, we're back to the silhouette thing. Think about something like a very classic, simple design like a slip dress or a tank dress, or something like those Grecian one-shouldered garments. You're looking for something that's very simple with not much ornamentation, and a good. I personally would choose a really basic color, like a neutral, like maybe black or brown. I love brown. Lots of people don't like brown, and I'm like, brown is great. You can mix it with pink and red, and you look like a chocolate-covered cherry. It's it's wonderful.
That'd be a nice rich one.
Yeah, right. Rich is there. There you go. We're back to the whole color saturation. It's really important. So I personally would pick a neutral color, but it will work in any color. So you take this basic silhouette, and then this also goes for where we were talking about the modesty issue, where how much skin do you want to show. Maybe generally you do bare your midriff, but for this one special event, and you need something more covered, and you don't really want to bust out the checkbook. So you can just go to or even I buy a lot of that kind of thing at resale shops or vintage clothing places. They'll have a lot of it I'm sure it depends on your area, but where we live, very reasonably priced. You can get just a very basic formal. You do want to pay attention to how closely it hugs your body. You want to pick something that is either what in sewing we call close fitting, which means it skims the body, which is going to probably be your best bet, or something that we call very close fitting, which is really tight, But if you choose something like that, you're going to have to be sure that there's enough stretch in the garment that you're not going to bust a seam. So if you'll pick this, some very basic dress with very little ornamentation, then you can add a really elaborate hip belt, maybe a vest. You can use the high front tops that we see Spanish dancers wear. All those things can be put on top of this very basic silhouette, and poof, you've got a belly dancer. Instantly you're a belly dancer. Particularly there's some vest patterns from Scheherazade Imports carries them. I'm sorry, I don't remember the brand name. But you can get them at Scheherazade Imports. And there are these very, again, back to the whole cheesy thing, really, little, the vest has a point in the back or whatever. And you put that on top of one of those simple dresses, and that creates two things. For one thing, you've got a really cost-effective costume. So you're putting all your money with your ornamentation, all your stones, and all that really expensive, pricey stuff. That's in a smaller area, so it costs you less. So we've got our vest, we've got our hip belt, and those things can then travel to another garment. And the other thing is quick change elements. So let's say you only have frequently I have 3 minutes to make some kind of a really quick change to my costume. So you can just put a different belt, or maybe take the vest off and dance without the vest, or whatever, and it makes this wonderful kind of a quick change option.
Now, speaking of vests, my very first costume had a vest because I had a bra that I didn't want to cover the sides for. I was too lazy. And that was not a good look for me in terms of, just what's flattering and what's not. So it's not something I wear often, but I love them. When I see them on somebody else, it really says old school belly dance.
Agreed.
It's so evocative.
Agreed.
But, so as you were talking about that, I was thinking about, if I was taking this dress, what would I do? And I was thinking about a look that I really love, which is a dress with some kind of a hip belt and an enormous, elaborate necklace that just
see.
Your chest.
Yes.
That's piece ornamentation.
Right. And, there used to be, I don't think I hadn't thought of that in a very, very long time, but there used to be something when I was, a baby belly dancer. It was called a Waterfall Necklace. And it's just as you say, it was a choker, and it had layers of chains that fell to the hips sometimes. And so when you've got really elaborate jewelry, that's a piece of costuming. It is.
It shows your chest and shoulder movement.
Right.
It's lovely. I mean,
right.
That and a nice hip belt and maybe some fancy sleeves or bracelets, and it's
sure.
lovely.
And consider detached sleeves, because I'm somebody who gets overheated really quickly, and those cool pits and detached sleeves that really can help you control your temperature. And by the way, if you didn't like the vest style that you just didn't think you look good on your figure, gosh, there's tons of different styles. Even depending, of course, on the kind of movements you're going to be doing, even vests that maybe come further down, lower down to where maybe they're almost to your hip, those kinds of vests, if they have a lot of that embroidery, or it's made with brocade or something like that, those can look very ethnic, very belly dancey, and there's just so many silhouettes, so many different kinds of vests. So if you tried that one and you didn't like it, maybe was it too baggy? What was your reason that you didn't like it?
It was two things. So one is that for me, I find that bra styles that angle at the shoulder, so halters or faux halters, are the most flattering thing because it shows this lovely expansive shoulder, and every vest style I've ever tried covers that. The other problem is that the length of my torso is one of my assets, and so when I add a vest, it shortens that length.
Right. What you might try, again, we're back to those patterns that we talked about. There are very fitted vests that are cropped, so and they have cutouts. So your bra is, now it will change the silhouette. It won't, it depends on what you choose. If you choose something that is what they call a keyhole opening, which means the entire bust line is exposed, and then you have a strip of fabric that hooks the vest together underneath your bust. Those are very fitted, and they have lots of different neckline shapes. So you could pick one that had a neckline shape that gave you that same from the neck to the underarm kind of a line that you're looking for. You really would have to play around with it. I love vests. They're like my go-to thing.
They look so great. Well, the thing I like best about vests is that they look opulent, right? It's another piece that you're wearing. It's like every piece of jewelry that you throw on adds this level of luxury.
Right. Very true. Very true, particularly if you're using luxurious fabrics.
Now, you mentioned the dress that you mentioned is a good option for quick changes. Are there any other suggestions that you have when people need to make fast changes?
Yes. Now, this just comes from my background, and it may or may not be enough for what you're looking for. But when I was dancing, we had two finales. There would be a finale right before intermission, and there would be a finale at the end. And the director absolutely insisted that you must make some small change to your costume for the finale. Now, you could wear, it could be more or less the same costume, but some little something about it had to be different. So sometimes that meant you only had 3 minutes to make the change. So if you are super short on time, then do something like, tuck your skirt, or change your headpiece, or if you're wearing a vest, take the vest off. If you're not wearing a vest, put a vest on, or put a different vest on, or change your belt. Those things are going to. I see dancers that are they're stressed because they're hurrying and they're rushing and they're stripping all the way down. And I think to myself, why are you doing that to yourself? Don't put yourself in that kind of a duress. Make some small change because maybe the audience would like to totally see something completely different, but they don't necessarily have to be satisfied. So one thing would be to, if you're really, really low on time, is just change something really small like that. Another thing would be, again, we're back to, this is my background, sometimes we had to change in front of the stagehand. That's just the way it was. So you don't want to strip all the way down. So maybe, you're wearing a leotard or something, so you're not quite as exposed, and you can slip your skirt off and put a different shaped skirt. So that would be relatively fast. And, we would go all out to not have to do major changing because the changing rooms were 3 flights up. So, when you've only got a few minutes to change, you're not, and even if you have lots of time, maybe you go, I don't think I want to do 3 flights of stairs. So something like just changing out your skirt or just changing out your hip band or something like that. I see lots of dancers that are stressing themselves, like they're really putting themselves, because they want a totally, this dance has a totally different feel than that dance. And I understand the need for that. But, again, if you go with a base, you're doing a light-hearted piece and then you're doing a darker piece, maybe go with a dark, rich color. And for the more light-hearted piece, you want glittery, sparkly kind of accents. And for the darker piece, maybe you want, metal and studs and shells and that kind of thing. So you can still use that whole idea of a base, like a base dress, or even a base top and bra, and just change the other elements. So you still get that difference in mood without having to just totally undress.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the points that you've already covered can really come together in this example, right? So let's say you've got a silver bedla on, and you have your romantic piece, so you pair that with, luscious pink chiffon.
Right.
And then you drop your skirt and drop your sleeves, and then you rip on, the blood red velvet.
Yeah.
And the blood red velvet sleeves.
Yes, exactly. See, that you've got the idea, and it was so much less stressful. And the audience is, for the most part, they're just as happy.
But, you can do the fabric texture, so you've got the velvet versus
chiffon.
Oh,
yeah.
Mood, the silhouette stuff that we talked about.
Right.
Maybe Tramp has slinky mermaid skirt on, and your romantic one has the big floofy skirt
Right.
on.
Right, exactly. And yes, and texture is that's a big element. Texture is a big element. Both things like velvet and what I call think about the difference in how velvet is rich, but maybe it's not shiny. It's going to absorb the light. But then if you go with something like a brocade, embroidered brocade or something like that, where you have again, it's rich. It's very rich. But now instead of it absorbing the light, it's more reflective, so it's going to bounce the light off. So texture is a big element.
Now, what do you need to take into account when you're costuming a group versus a soloist?
Okay. Again, you may not. Some people may not deal with this, but when you're dealing with dancers and costuming, it can be a very emotional thing for them. You're dealing with things like body image. You're also dealing with, maybe a new dancer that's worked really hard and they're super excited, and for whatever reason they absolutely hate the costume that you've picked. So you're dealing with a lot of emotions. You're also the most important thing when you're dealing with a group is what I think of as like kind of the tolerance level of everybody involved. So if maybe you have some ladies that say, I do not want to expose my midriff. I don't want to do it. I don't feel comfortable. Or my arms. That's another area that lots of ladies feel uncomfortable about. And if you're the person in charge, then and you have to take all those. Okay, well, am I willing to force this person to do something they're not comfortable with? And so you have to take everybody's tolerance level, including your own, or the instructor, depending if you're like myself. I was just the costume mistress. The instructor gave me a lot of input about what they wanted it to look like. So again, have to take the instructor's tolerance level. So what is the tolerance level? So let's say you've got some ladies that don't feel comfortable exposing their midriff. So then you go, okay, well, would this person be willing to dance with a body stocking? And if the answer is yes, then you have to go, okay, well, I'm the person in charge, or I'm the instructor. Am I willing to have a couple of people who look a little different because they're wearing a body stocking? And you might go, well, yes, I could live with that if it was nude, because it's going to give that same effect. Or you may, some teachers have a vision and they want what they want, and you just kind of have to, it's a very emotional thing, and you just kind of have to weigh it all out. So another thing that you have to take into consideration, much more so with children than adults, but surely there's somebody out there that deals with children, I do, but another thing you have to is the size breaks. A lot of times, especially in children's garments, we see like this, or maybe this is what the teacher wants, but you have a child in the group that's an extra small, and that one only comes in small. So then you have to decide, okay, well, do I want a dancer wearing a baggy costume, and am I going to be able to fix it? Or like I had, when I first became the costume mistress, I had a group that just, oh my gosh, I had everything from an extra small child to a small adult size. And there really aren't any costumes that come in that range. So then we had to go, okay, well, how do I make them all look uniform or kind of tie it all together? So what we ended up doing was the center girl, who was the tallest, who needed this small adult, we found a costume that was appropriate for the style and would fit, and we had each of the dancers on either side of her wear that same costume. And so they were kind of preteen, and so the fact that their costume was a little more mature and a little less girlish than the others, and they were in the middle, that all kind of worked. So you kind of have to play with it. So sizing is another thing you have to may or may not come into play. Like for myself, as an audience member, I really don't care if everybody's identical. I'm just as happy to see a performance where every single dancer looks totally different. I'm fine with that. But there are people that want everybody to be uniform. So if you're going to go that route and you want everybody to look alike, really go the extra mile and think about details. So think about, does everybody have the same kind of earrings on? Is everybody wearing their flower on the right side? You want to really go the extra mile. And the best way to do that, to make everybody look just alike, is use points on the body as measuring elements. So, for instance, we wear buns. So our buns are supposed to be level with the tops of our ears. Maybe your necklace is supposed to hit you at the navel, The top of your sleeve is supposed to hit you at the elbow. Everybody's skirt is supposed to hit them at the ankle. So if you use those measuring points, and it doesn't matter how tall or how short the dancer is, the body points are going to be the same.
So the whole costume scales with the dancer instead of being the exact same measurement.
Exactly. And then line everybody up and take a look at them and really literally line them up and go, okay, does everybody's skirt look more or less the same length? Does everybody's sleeve hit them more or less on the same point of their body? And the more exacting that you are, the bigger the impact. Of course, it's a pain.
Now, you mentioned the situation where not everybody is dressed alike. How do you go about creating like a unified look or a harmonious look when people are wearing different things?
My favorite way to do that is to pick a color or two colors and say to the dancers, particularly if this is dancers that you don't have to provide the costumes for, they're coming up with their own costumes, and say, okay, everybody needs to come up with certainly give them fabric samples or something to go on so we're all on the same page, but say, okay, everybody needs a blue costume. And we want it to be this kind of blue. Maybe you want a cobalt or you want a turquoise or whatever it might be. So everybody, we need you to come up with a costume that is more or less this color. And you're going to get a little bit of variation, but, if it's more or less the same family, or you can pick something that's neutrals, and remember that metallics are considered neutral. So, like, for instance, I remember a piece that we did where everybody did black and silver. So, and it was, wow, it was big. There was lots and lots of dancers on stage, and everybody totally different, but everybody black and silver. And so you can pick a color, and a really good example of that is the belly dance superstars use this trick a lot. You'll see particularly, and not always only them, but, the primary dancers are dressed in the same color. And everybody different styles, but everybody wearing that color. And it's very, very effective because, and there's another really good reason for that, or a couple of good reasons. One of them is it lets that dancer communicate her personal style, which, again, not everybody's going to agree with this, but I really like it when the beauty of the individual dancer is allowed to shine through rather than, I just wiped out all her features and painted in what I wanted.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt for a second. This is Nadira going on the record. If you disagree with what Treasure just said, shame on you. This dance is all about being yourself.
Well, I've had directors that, literally, they wanted to just use makeup to wipe out that dancer's features, and I don't like that. I don't like the way that looks, but everybody's different, and that's okay if you don't agree with me, but for my personal taste, I want to see that beauty of that individual dancer. So if you tell everybody, okay, I don't care what you do, just make sure it's this color, that gives them the freedom to express their personality. And another thing that's really, really important is it lets them be able to work with their own budget. That's really something that is a big reason why people quit, because of the expense. And so if you can make it to where they can spend lots of money if they like it, and they have lots of money to spend, or maybe I don't have so much money, but I still would like to perform. This is an excellent, excellent way to accommodate everybody, accommodate body image. If they, oh my gosh, I hate my arms, I don't want to show my arms, it's okay. You don't have to. Yeah, you can, cover up if that's what you want to do. The only thing that you really have to pay attention to with this kind of an idea is that if you've got one person that has lots and lots of bling, your eye just goes to that and you can't see anything else. So you do have to make everybody more or less blinged the same amount. And there's ways to do that cost effectively as well.
More jewelry.
Right, exactly. So you can control the cost still, but do be aware that shiny things tend to draw the audience's eye more. So you don't want one dancer that just is covered in rhinestones and nobody else. Let's say you've got one dancer that wants to look more ethnic. she can still fit in, just pile it on. Like if everybody else is wearing sequins and rhinestones and whatever, that's fine. You've got this one girl, she wants to look more ethnic, great, pile it on. Go all out. And then she'll look just as blinged in a different way.
I want to add an extra recommendation for the everybody in the same color thing, because my sister did that in her wedding. We were all bridesmaids, and she said, just wear green. And we all looked fabulous. We were standing there with this beautiful, farm park, and everything was green behind us, and there was this beautiful field. And we were actually all in different shades of green, but it happened to work in this case. But it really made a really nice unified look, and everybody got to wear exactly the dress they wanted.
Yes, very important, because then we're back to, you don't have to think about your costume. You like the way you look. You're not out there going, oh, my gosh, I just, you're thinking about your dance. You're not thinking about your costume, which is what you want.
Yeah. I've also seen the opposite technique used, usually for more, I don't want to say more serious, that's not the word I want, but more hardcore troops, where everybody will get the same costume in a different color.
Right. And that's that's a beautiful look, too. And that goes back to me as an audience member. I like to do that. I love it. I saw a piece recently, and they were all wearing the same costume but in different shades, and oh my gosh, they had picked the most fabulous colors ever. And they were dancing, and I thought, oh, they look like luscious pieces of fruit. They look delicious. So yeah, that also works. So it can go either way. So if you have a style that everybody can live with and afford, then, and the more colors, the better,
I've seen a lot of troops do that with the Pharaonics Great Loop, which is very expensive but pretty universally flattering. And it's also a very high-end lush costume. And so if it's like a professional troupe where everybody's out there performing, then they have to put in that level of investment to buy their costume anyway, and so they get something that everybody can like, and they pick their own shades.
Right.
But again, it is going to be tough to find things that will work for everybody's body and budget.
Agreed. We're in the tip section, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have this great tip that I would like to share, and a couple of things. One of them is using color wheels and other reference materials. So I'm all about color. As I've said, I love it. It makes me happy. It almost doesn't matter what color it is. But something that is really, really going to help make a big impact visually on your costuming will be using a color wheel. So if you can get these, they're commonly used in quilting. So you go to a hobby store or anybody that sells quilting materials, you can usually find one. And so there are different ways that you can use a color wheel. If you choose all in the same family, like when you look at the color wheel, there'll be red and pink and red-violet. If you choose all in that same family, fabrics, then you're going to get a very matchy-matchy looking costume, which is, that's great. I like that. It's fun. For myself, because I'm loud and flamboyant, I really like contrasting colors. So there are different ways that you can use the color wheel. You can, pick a color that you want to be your base or your main color, and then go across to the opposite side and pick the opposing color, and that will create this very, very striking image.
Can I break in for a second?
Sure.
Those of you who are looking at the webcast right now, you can see this in action. So if you do look at a color wheel, you'll see that this beautiful cobalt blue and that very zingy orange that's in Treasure's picture here are on opposite sides of the color wheel. And
right.
That's why she put that vest on that dress.
Right. And then there's also like a trine thing where you can pick, you put a little triangle in the middle and one of the points to the color that you like best, and then the other points of the triangle will point to other colors that will go well with that color that you've chosen. So think about using a color wheel. Another thing that is wonderful reference material is old movies or old other movies that are either old movies or non-belly dance movies. So think about like Strictly Ballroom. I love that movie because, oh my gosh, the costumes are so over the top and there's just The colors are like, I would never think to mix those two colors, and it looks great, and it's over the top, but it's not a belly dance movie, but you can still take that information and use it. And so another good reference material is like old movies, like, say, really any old movie that's a big one, like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, or all those really old movies. They put a lot of effort into the details of the costume, lots of little pleats and little tucks and ruffles, and they're very, very intense. So think about, so my best example, which I've been thinking about because I really wanted to express this idea. So think about Gone with the Wind. Like, there's absolutely zero belly dancing about Gone with the Wind, right? So there's that whole scene where, Scarlett's been disgraced, and she goes to Millie's party in this fabulous dress, and she gets left alone, and they open the door, and there she is in this glorious dress, and you just think, wow. So there's nothing about this that's belly dance. So you look at that costume and you just go, wow, what about that just is so striking? Well, the color. It's really this gorgeous wine, really beautiful, beautiful color. The texture, we're talking about texture. The texture is this, what looks to me to be like a high-end velvet. So, this is a luxury fabric. And then she's got these kind of unrelated elements. She's got feathers, and she's got this beautiful piece of net over her hair, like a hat. It's just fabulous. And so you can take all those elements, those very same elements, and transfer that to a belly dance costume. And feathers and net and high-end velvet and that beautiful lush color, and you are going to get the exact visual impact. It was that visually stunning kind of an impact that you had with this dress that really had absolutely nothing to do with costuming as we think of it. So all kinds of movies, older movies particularly, even you can get from Netflix, sometimes streaming, and occasionally on Turner Classic Movies, there'll be these old Mexican movies, like from the 40s, and particularly the Westerns. So you've got this girl, and she's wearing a big sombrero, and she's got on this great, kind of Western-y looking dress, and the trims that they use on the bottom very often are, maybe it's just ribbon or something simple like that, but they've made this very elaborate geometric design or whatever. So again, you can take that out of context and place it on a belly dance skirt, and it's going to be just as fabulous.
The only thing I would add to that is that if you're watching a movie that's been colorized, just note that the colors are often different. So sometimes they would put people in light blue when they meant it to look white in the black and white version. So they're playing with that, and the colorization doesn't always take that into account.
True, very true.
But those will look funny.
Yeah, and although if you like the way that colorized version looks,
do it that way.
Yeah, do it that way. That's right. So another great kind of out-of-context piece of reference material is Bollywood movies and Bollywood, like I have coffee table books that have just Bollywood photos, and it's great. So a lot of times when we look at these kind of images, like when we look at sword and sandal flicks, or we look at Bollywood movies, we often think, I really want a top exactly like that, or I really want, that theme or whatever it is. We're trying to replicate the actual garment. Try to look at it through a different lens. Bollywood stuff, it's so colorful. It's very bright, and very often it's unusual color combinations. So look at it through that kind of a lens where you're looking for, rather than trying to replicate that costume, unless you're doing kind of a Bollywood flavored piece, then just look at it through the eye of texture and color and other things like I have there's this great photo in one of my Bollywood coffee table books, and it's a row of women, and you're seeing them from the back, and they have long, thick braids that hang down to their hips, just one long braid down the middle of their back, and every few inches they have a huge white carnation. So all along this huge rope braid, they have this big white flower every few inches, and it's very visually, has a lot of impact. So a flower in a braid, that can be for any kind of dance. So if you take this kinds of reference material and just look at it in a different way, you can pull all kinds of really great ideas.
Such a good tip. Now, we have only got like 15 minutes left before we're going to have to cut this off, so I need to open this up to questions and answers. So, those of you who are calling in on the phone or on Skype, you can press *2 to raise your hand if you want to ask a question or make a comment. And those of you who are on the webcast, there's a little question box on the left-hand side of your screen. Just be sure to include your name and your question when you submit that. Now, while we're waiting for folks to ask their questions, Treasure, I'm going to ask you, if people take one thing away from this call, if they learn one thing, what would you want that to be?
What I would want them to take away would be bold. Be really bold. I mean, this is costuming. This is the place to be bold. So, go wild with your colors. Go wild with everything. Just really, really go all out, and your audience is going to love it.
I love that advice. Okay, I don't see any raised hands on the phone or Skype yet. And remember, Skype folks, that's *2 on your Skype keypad, not *2 on your keyboard. We do have some questions on the webcast. So, somebody said, any good resources you can recommend for learning makeup design or products that you particularly like? I want to go a little more dramatic, but no idea where to start.
Okay, I'm going to be using some brand names that I don't know how regional this is. So one of the really, really good for stage makeup is called Eye Candy. They make excellent, not only body glitter, their glitter stuff is great. It doesn't hurt. Like I bought some MAC glitter products that after I'd had it on for a few hours, it literally felt like it was scratching me. So the Eye Candy stuff is great because they not only have what we would traditionally think of as glitter, glittery stuff, but they also have colors that have this metallic sheen, and they're safe to use on all different kinds of parts of your body. So you can use them as eyeshadow. I have a red that has a metallic element to it, and I use that both for blush. And also, I'll put my lipstick on so it has something to stick to, and then I will pat it onto my lipstick, and so you have this shimmer, or actually it's really not, it doesn't look the way glitter looks, although glitter is great too, but this has more of a metallic sheen. It works really, really well. So I like Eye Candy. I have really sensitive eyes. I have to be careful. Another thing I would say is, ladies, fake eyelashes make a huge impact.
Oh, my goodness, yes.
They make all the difference in the world. Particularly, we're talking about the difference between a large and small stage. If you wear, my friend used to call them the cow eyelashes, the ones that are really, really long on a big stage. They can actually, they can see that you have eyelashes, So those are great. Makeuping. There's some really, again, we're back to, because this is my love, the color values and all that. I'm going to have to get you the name. His name is Kevin something. I can get that name for you. Something like that. Something like that. I'll get the exact name.
He has a book called Making Faces.
Yes.
So look up that book, and then you find the author, and then you can go to his other stuff.
Right. And he has two books. And he talks, one of them is where he's taken stars and made them up as other stars.
Making Faces, yeah.
Right. So those are great because you go, wow, this is how he maybe you want a period look, so you want that kind of bee-stung look. He tells you how to do that. So he does a lot of that period makeup in that book. So that one's great reference material. The other one I like really, really well because he talks about darks and lights. He'll have a photo and he'll go, okay, this is what it looks like when you have a dark mouth and a light or a nude eye. Now, this is what it looks when it's reversed. This is how it looks when you have a heavy eye and a lighter or a more nude mouth. So that's back to that color value kind of idea. So both of those for makeup I think those are excellent reference books. I haven't actually seen it, but Princess Birhana has a double DVD. So that's a lot of information. You're getting a 2-disc DVD. I haven't actually viewed it, but I've been very happy with lots of her other products. So that's an idea.
Bombshell, and it's very, very good.
Oh, do you have it?
She did that with Davila from California as well, who's a makeup artist for Hollywood.
Yeah, cool. So then I would get back to the big stage thing. You know, from a distance, people really they can't see. I mean, they would get on to me about my eyebrows.
Oh.
Treasure, you have no eyebrows. You have no eyebrows. Okay, so eyebrows, especially in Spanish dance, are super important because they communicate emotion.
Absolutely.
So if you have light eyebrows particularly, but even if you have dark eyebrows, you need to really pay attention to filling them in, making them a certain shape. All those things are really, really important on a big stage. Eyeliner, you know.
Can I break in with the eyebrows thing?
Sure.
So this is not just something for big stages. Even if you are up close and personal in a restaurant, you need to darken your eyebrows because they do express your expression.
Right.
I have a friend who's blonde, and she has taken, like, she did an experiment. She gets more tips on days when she darkens her eyebrows on the ones that she doesn't because people feel that connection. It matters.
That is great. So yeah, they were always on me about my eyebrows. So that's a personal thing that I know real well. So eyeliner, exaggerated, longer, you know, more extended toward the eyebrow. Yeah, we talked about glitter. Let me think, is there anything else? I'm not a super makeup person. I happen to really love vintage makeup. And so I have spent hours and hours and hours on YouTube watching, tutorials on vintage makeup. And for myself, of course, everybody's different. Everybody's trying to create a different look. But one of the best changes that I've made for myself that have not only, in my personal opinion, made me look better, but also have simplified my getting ready, is this kind of Marilyn eye that has a very light lid with just a little bit of brown or a little bit of an accent at the outside corner of the eye, and then the black liner. It's a very 50s and 60s look, and with a like a classic red lip. I spent, again, countless hours watching tutorials, and I came up with my own version, and it's so much faster. It's fast, it's classic, it goes with everything. You don't have to worry if you're changing costumes. Is it going to look funny with the next costume? And I highly recommend all those vintage makeup tutorials, even if you go with a different look. They're classic. I mean, they're gonna. You can find one that makes you happy, and you can do it every single time, and it makes your getting ready so much quicker and easier and faster. And yes, I highly recommend it.
Okay. Let me go back to the webcast for another question. Again, phone and Skype callers, you can press *2 to raise your hand. All right, Kristen in Pittsburgh says, any advice on skirts for shorter dancers? I love the flow of many-yard skirts but feel dwarfed by them.
Then I would say you need to find something that's more controlled from the waist to the knee. If you feel overwhelmed, also color is going to be really important to you. You're going to want a single color at least from the hip to the ankle. Consider a dress, or consider, I personally insert my skirts into a leotard so that if the skirt flies up, I got undergarments on and it all matches, and, so consider a single color all the way down. Or if you like that volume, then you want to control the volume from the waist to the hip. So maybe volume is okay. So maybe a trumpet style would be a really good choice. Inverted trumpet would be a good choice for you. Or consider a circle skirt because there's not so much fullness at the waist. It's a graduated fullness, so it's tighter at the hip, and then it's going to flare out at the bottom. I think and again, we go back to the whole tribal thing. If you're wearing something as large as a tribal style skirt, pick something smaller. You can get that same twirly girl effect without the yardage and more control and more cost to control your cost. So consider something that is the volume is controlled from the hip to the thigh at least, and depending on what kind of look you're going for, or if you're doing skirt work or not, you might want to control the volume from the hip to the knee.
Mm-hmm. So something like the hybrid style,
right,
or the inverted trumpet, if you're not doing serious skirt work.
Right.
Gotcha.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, now that reminds me, you've used mermaid and trumpet to mean two very different styles.
Right.
A lot of costumers use them interchangeably. So
folks,
make sure you go back to those slides. I'll post them when I post the call recording. So remember that the mermaid skirt is the one that's tight and slinky to the knee and then flares out. And the trumpet is the one that has some room in the thigh but is still semi-slim.
Yeah,
and then
it's more flared. Yeah, think of it this way. Think about the top of the skirt, rather, you know, a mermaid being, it's tight, it's fitted.
Like a mermaid's tail.
Yeah, like a mermaid's tail. Whereas in what I call an inverted trumpet, there's a lot of ease. I mean, you could easily move it around. How can I describe that? There's just a lot more room from the hip to the knee area. There's just a lot more room in what I call an inverted trumpet.
Right. It's almost like an A-line through the thigh and then gets fuller.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. The top looks like an A-line, but then when it gets to the knee, it really flares out. Mm-hmm.
But again, those slides will be available after the call if you need that. Okay, let's see. No phone questions. We have a couple more on the webcast. So, Claudia asks, what is a good source for belly covers?
I don't have any experience with purchasing these, but I can tell you what I've seen. There's a site that's called Sugar Petals. It's been a long time since I've looked, but they used to have what looked to me like, I'm just going by a picture on the web, but they look like they were really nice colors. They look like they'd probably fit really well. And it's, okay, when we're talking about belly color, I want to be sure I understand. Are we talking about a body stocking, or are we just talking about a drape or something?
Claudia didn't specify. Claudia, if you do want to clarify, you can, but I'm pretty sure she means a mesh belly cover.
Okay, so if we're talking like a body stocking, okay, Dalal has some that are cut, like depending again on what you want. They have some that are full, like a leotard. They also have some that are cut out in the bust line. So if you're wearing a decorated bra, then you could still use this, and it's versatile. They had it in flesh. They also had it in colors. Can't vouch for the quality, but it's there. There's also a lot of Sugar Petals. I assume they still exist. And if you just want, you just want something to cover your tummy, let's see, something that I found to be effective. Now, I don't, this would be probably in combination with, say, a body stocking. But something I have, I have kind of a pot belly. My stomach sticks out kind of funny, and it makes me feel uncomfortable. And there's a big difference between the size of my waist and the size of my belly, and it makes me feel kind of awkward. And I have found that it's super good way to disguise it is to wear a vest that has something that hangs down in the center front. So say a vest that has a chain drape, something on that order is and depending how the more chain, of course, the more it's going to disguise it. Something like I wear a lot of the tie front tops, like you see a Spanish dancer wear. It's kind of tied top, but just those little ties hanging down, somehow it camouflages that there's a big difference between the size of my stomach and the size of my waist, and so maybe you just need a little camouflage that way. But if you really want to cover it really well, you can also do things like take a triangular shape and pin it from, depending on what you want. You can pin it from your shoulder straps and let it kind of drape. Let's say you take the 2 points. How do I? Okay, so we have a point that hangs down to your navel. And then we take the other 2 points of the triangle, and one of them would be attached maybe to each bra strap. So then we create this kind of a cowl neckline that would cover your bra. So I don't know if that's the look you're looking for, but you can also take some of those triangular shapes and attach them like underneath, like say under the cup of your bra, and it's going to hang down. Who has a great, really, really great reference material on how to use those shapes is the Costume Goddess. She has some great books on how to take those shapes and hang them in different ways to cover different things, your stomach, your arms, other things like that. And I want to say that the one that has all that material in it is the one that she has that's on arms and sleeve variations, but I can double check that and get that information for you and find out which of the books it is that has all that information.
Great, and I can add that to the show notes if we decide to do that.
Right.
Speaking of body stockings, I have not shopped there myself, but there is bellystockings.com, which is out of the UK, and I know quite a few people who have bought from them. My understanding is that they have multiple styles and can cut them to size, which is helpful.
Great.
And I must say that if you can get them made to size, that is very helpful, especially if you have any shape that's non-standard.
Right.
Okay, let's see if we have more questions. Okay, phone folks, you can press *2. And I think that is it for the webcast. Last call, folks. Okay, and I think we are done with questions. Good,
okay.
Just good, because we're getting cut off this phone line in 2 minutes.
Okay.
So, now, Treasure, if people want to learn more from you, how can they do that?
Well, I'm very active on Facebook. You can friend me on Facebook. You can go and look at my website, which I'm going to try to be much more regular about updating. I have my DVD, which is Treasure Skirtwork. You can find that on Amazon. And that's Treasure Skirtwork for Fusion Belly Dance. And it's available on Amazon. You can also find it on CreateSpace. And I'm going to try, I've been really encouraged. A lot of people that have given me reviews on the DVD, I have a section in the beginning that's on costuming. I covered all these shapes and all that. And a lot of people have said that was really, really helpful. And so I'm going to try to start posting photos of what I'm working on, so you can kind of see, maybe get some ideas. And I'm always, if you have questions, let me know. I think those are the best places to find me.
Excellent. And for folks who are looking for her on Facebook, she's Treasure Marshall.
Right.
Can you spell your last name for us, just to be sure?
Marshall. And it's Treasure, just like Treasure Island.
All right. Oh, thank you so much, Treasure. This has been awesome. I can't believe it's been 2 hours. It feels like maybe 30 minutes. And thank you, everybody, for coming, especially at this unusual time slot. This is the end of our call, but that doesn't mean the conversation has to end. We've got a private Facebook group just for Clubhouse folks, and Treasure's in there, so if you want to chat with her, that's a great place to do it. And I will also send an email shortly, which will have an invitation to the Facebook group, as well as the call recording. And I will also include a link to our survey. This is where you can suggest topics for the Clubhouse or recommend particular speakers or anything that I can do to improve these calls for you. And our next call has not been scheduled yet. We'll do that sometime in August. And in the meantime, just be aware that this is the come-on-in kind of Clubhouse, not the no-boys-allowed kind. So if you know anybody who would like to join us, you can invite them to do that at bellydancegeek.com/clubhouse. And until next time, happy dancing.
Thanks so much for the invitation.
Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thanks for listening. For more geek-tacular resources, visit bellydancegeek.com.